Agency workflows on Pantheon. My name is David Needham. I'm a developer advocate at Pantheon. There's all sorts of ways you can reach me. But really, developer advocate is sort of a new title for me and for our team. We were previously something a little bit more complicated as far as like what we did, but basically what I love about being a developer advocate at Pantheon is that I get to come to conferences like this and speak to developers and site builders and people working with websites. And I get to share with them a little bit about what I know, and I get to kind of help inspire, educate, and teach them what I can. And then ultimately, if I'm doing my job right, it means that developers are more successful, getting things done more efficiently, and ultimately enjoying what they do more. And so it's kind of a reciprocal, just good energy thing going on, which really makes me happy. So if you look at traditional hosting, these are really the three big pillars that you might be familiar with. So shared hosting, you probably already know shared hosting. But really, sorry, 1 minute. Sorry, just a second. Let me adjust my screen. Actually, I think I'm okay. Right, so the thing about shared hosting is it's really cheap. And some clients, really cheap is all that they got, and that's okay. But the problem with shared hosting is if anyone's having a bad day, everyone on the shared hosting is having a bad day. And unfortunately, the opposite is also true. If anyone's having a really great day and they go viral, it also is really bad for everyone else in the shared hosting. So that's why agencies and clients often look to something like a single VM, where they can spin up a server, they can kind of manage the whole thing themselves, and then they can control how many different sites are actually on that virtual machine. That's pretty good. It's certainly better than shared hosting. But the problem is that you still end up with a single point of failure. If any one of the things goes wrong, if the database or the Apache configuration, or who knows, you push code and it breaks something, then your entire site still goes down with a single VM. And then scalability also can become a little bit of a hassle there. So that's why bigger agencies, bigger clients often rely on a cluster, which has several application containers. You have database with a redundant database, and you have all this infrastructure set up. Which is pretty good. I mean, it certainly is like the best option from these three that you have here. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to have a dedicated DevOps person who is familiar with architecture and knows how to set up this configuration, and who can really stay full-time focused on making sure that security is up to date, that everyone has access that needs access to the right pieces. And ultimately, the hardware also becomes quite expensive. So this is a little bit of the problem that the founders of Pantheon originally had. All of them came from agency backgrounds before, and they found that as they were serving their clients, there were all sorts of different options available, and they all had different preferences. They had different needs, and that required different processes to set up and different workflows. And unfortunately, it meant that it was a lot of overhead for the client, so a lot of extra time to consult and make sure that everything's set up properly, but also a lot of added expense, making sure that it's the right solution for what they're looking for, and then getting the developer team set up and ready to go on Pantheon was also, or I'm sorry, not on Pantheon, but on whatever shared hosting it was, can become complicated because you have a different workflow and a different process for every single site that you go with. So they said, okay, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way for us to do this. So they came up with a single containerized platform when they founded Pantheon. And they said, regardless of what size of site that is that you're working with, whether it's a tiny mom and pop shop or like a personal blog or whatever, all the way up to a huge enterprise tier website with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of page views, doesn't matter. We're going to use the same workflow for agencies, and we're going to use the same sort of like platform where the experience that you're working with is going to be the same, and then when you upgrade from one plan to the next, it's just like adding additional containers. But all of this is happening under the hood. So if we take a look under the hood at our actual architecture, we are built on containers. We have over a million, it's probably even a lot more by now, over 6 billion page views a month. So again, from the tiny little site to the huge enterprise site, the architecture is set up in a way that you don't have to think so much about what's happening under the hood. you just sign up for an account, focus on the site that you're building, and all of the server performance and security things are handled automatically. So we're going to start by talking about the edge. In this case, the edge is what most of the people viewing your website are actually going to be viewing. This is where the cached version of your website lives. And so with Pantheon, we use Varnish for our cache at this level. And because of our new global CDN, these are all over the world. So if you are in Berlin and you go to a website that's hosted on Pantheon, if it's cached, you'll be viewing the cached version from our data center, or from our point of presence that's in Germany. And we have a couple different ones there. So you don't have to hop across the ocean and back to negotiate that. And so you end up with a much faster and more reliable website. If for some reason the website is not cached, or if you need to start letting people log in, or checking out the card or anything like that, then we start routing to the Runtime Matrix, which is made up of all the containers that make up your site. So this is where your Drupal site actually lives. This is where PHP and Nginx lives. And then for all of these machines, regardless of what tier you're on, we also have redundant containers set up, so that if we detect that something isn't quite right on one of the containers that's serving up traffic, we're able to seamlessly, under the hood, without any sort of interruption whatsoever, route traffic to the new duplicate container, spin down the old container, and then kind of see what happened. This also means that we can apply security updates at the server level without interrupting any sort of any sites, without any downtime or anything like that. So under that, connected to the Runtime Matrix, we also have MariaDB, which is our open source database solutions, just like MySQL. We have it optimized for performance, and depending on the level that you're on, we also have the redundancy in place. We have Redis, which is object cache. Object cache is ideal for logged in traffic. So if you are logged in, you're going to be hitting the edge. If you're not logged in, you're going to be hitting the edge, and that's the Varnish cache. If you are logged in, you're going to be routed to the Runtime Matrix. And if you're using Redis, it means that your logged in traffic is also going to be faster, because the database queries are able to be cached as well. And then we have Apache Solr, which if you have needs for search on your site, if it needs to be fast and full of functionality. Basically, if search is a key part of your website, you probably want to consider looking at Apache Solr as an option. We have that built in with our with the business and professional tiers, so you just enable it, and it's all kind of the pieces get connected together, and then it's easy to set up. And then Valhalla. Valhalla is sort of our secret sauce. So we're able to keep files in sync across each of your environments, across all of the containers, because of Valhalla. So even if you have a website that's several gigs large, you could easily click a button and clone from your live site down to your dev site or some other site in just a minute or a few seconds in some cases. And it doesn't matter that it was several gigs of data. And these things just work. So ultimately, this is what Pantheon consists of. This is the website management platform that is Pantheon. So we end up focusing on the sorts of things that your clients kind of take for granted, I think, often. That you have a fast and performant website that's reliable. But the other part of that is also the tools that we provide to developers. And we're going to talk a little bit about the tools today when we look at the different agency workflows. So let's just jump on into that. So this is the basic idea, the sort of developer workflow that I was taught even before I came to work for Pantheon, many years before Pantheon was even a thing. If you're building a web application, having at least a dev site and a live site. You don't want to work directly on the live site, because if you make some sort of a change or if you apply an update and it doesn't go how you planned, then you just broke the live website. So that's relatively obvious. But we also recommend having a test environment. And in this case, the test environment is identical to the live environment. So when you work on your new feature or apply your security update or whatever you're doing in dev, you're able to commit that, deploy that up to test, and then either manually QA, click through the site and test it, or you can even set up automated updates, or automated tests that check to make sure that your website is not going to have any problems or go down or have unexpected changes when you apply your updates. So all of your commits, all of your code, your updates, your new functionality is going to be starting in dev, go up to test, then go up to live. On the other side of that, we have syncing content. So we're referring to content in this case as your database and your files. And your files are like your files that are associated with content. So you create a blog post, you have an image that you upload with it, or a PDF or something like that. That is a file. So your code goes up from dev test live, your content, so your database and your files, can come down. And in Pantheon, you just click a button and it syncs up the environment from one side to the other. All right, so let's take a quick look at the Pantheon dashboard. All right, so when you log into Pantheon, you have a dashboard that looks just like this. You're able to kind of click through and see all the sites that you have. You can also see a list of all of your organizations that you're involved with. So if you are part of an agency, you'll see that there. And I'm going to skim through this pretty quickly because, again, I want to focus on having some time at the end for questions and digging into more things later. But let me just click on a site here and jump into what that looks like. So here we have a website that I created. It's called Needham Bikes. If I click on View Development Site, I can actually open it up, and I can see it's the development site because it starts with dev dash, the name of my site, and then .pantheonsite.io. So this is what it looks like in the dev site. Looks pretty good. If I jump back to my dashboard, so I can see here at the top I have the 3 environments out of the box, dev, test, and live. It's easy to click on any one of these and to click on open the environment and kind of see what that environment looks like. All right, if I jump over here to the top, I also have a section for workflows. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger. So I have a section here for workflows where I can see all of the things that people have done in this site over time. So, if looks like here I created a multidev or deleted a multidev environment. If I clear the cache from the dashboard, any of these operations or workflows that happen, I'll see when it's happening with a little spinning ball over here, and I'll be able to click and actually see who did it and how long ago it started. I also have a section here for team where I can add people to this particular site. It's also possible from the settings section here to actually invite someone to pay for your site. So if you are not the person who pays for the site, whether it's your manager or the client, you're able to come in here and invite that person to the site, and then they're made the owner. They can select what plan is appropriate, and then, or you can suggest what plan, and then they'll put in their information and actually pay for it. This section right here is where you would also enable Solar and Redis, and then you can get some information about the site, including what PHP version the site is currently running. All right, so from here, we also have the section where you can select which development mode that you're currently working in. So in this case, we are in Git mode. There's also SFTP mode. So if your developers prefer to work with SFTP, if you prefer to work with tools that kind of leverage SFTP, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I think typically SFTP has carried a little bit of a stigma with it because I think a lot of people associate SFTP with cowboy coding, or logging in directly to the live site and making code changes directly there. But the way that Pantheon is set up, the whole process, the whole workflow is based in Git. So if you're in SFTP mode, I'm switching now, but it's not important. When you're in SFTP mode, you're able to make changes directly to the server, whether it's logging in by SFTP or using the Drupal interface to upload or update your modules, or you can also connect via Drush to update files directly on the server. And in those cases, you're changing files directly on the server. And you'll see when you make changes that there's actually a section that will say, you have code changes in this environment, write a commit message, and you click commit. And it makes you go through the process of saving a commit so you can see exactly what's happened and who's been doing it. So even if your team isn't all on board with Git, if it seems too complicated or if they're not into that, that's okay. You can use SFTP and you still get the benefit of a commit log. You can see who did each commit, when it happened, and then whatever the commit message actually is. So it's easy to switch back and forth between SFTP and Git mode and connect to either one of those that you want. So for each environment, we also have sections here. So we're currently in code where we can review all the code that we've made, all the changes we've made to this environment. We've also have a section here for status, where you can click and, especially for your live environment, but for any environment, you can actually jump in and see kind of a status report of what is currently going on with this particular site. So it's great to check this to make sure that you don't have any security updates, that your performance is set up, your caching is set up properly. In this case, it's telling me, hey, I haven't made a backup recently. I might want to consider doing that. We also have a section down here for database and files. So if you want to maybe copy this new content that's happened in the live environment and pull it down into my dev environment, I just have to go over here to say clone database and files from live. I can make sure those two are checked. And then I have the option of choosing either runupdate.php, which is good if I'm doing updates, or clear my caches. And then I just have to click the button. And so now, if there were people adding new content, new blog posts, new things to the store on the live site, these are now getting copied down into my dev site. I also have a section here for import and export, if I would like to do that, which can be really handy if you're migrating or building a site on Pantheon, but then taking it somewhere else. You can do that through this interface here. We have a section for PHP errors, if you have any of those. We can add domains. You can, of course, create backups, which happens automatically on a schedule if you're on a paid plan. And we have a section here for security, where you can put an additional level of authentication on top of your site if you choose to do that. And then every site that you spin up with Pantheon comes with New Relic APM Pro out of the box, which is a huge performance tool that gives you great insight into why your website might be running slow. It gives you notifications if it detects that your website is running slower than you might expect, and it gives you a really deep look into like what functions are being called that cause your website to be slow, or what database queries are being called. All right, and then this sidebar that you see here is pretty much the same for each of the environments. So whether you're in dev, test, or live, they're all right there. So let me just call out the elephant in the room here. There is an update available for Drupal, and these updates do appear directly in your interface here. So whenever there's a core update to Drupal, it pops up saying, just like this one says here, it says there's one upstream update available. So if I want to apply this, all I have to do is check the boxes that are appropriate, click Apply Updates, and then it will get pulled in. I'm not actually going to do this right now, though, because I want to show you a different way later on in the presentation. Does anyone have any questions about this so far? Okay. Let's keep on going. All right. So, here we go. So there are really, in this case, we're sort of identifying 10 different workflows that agencies identify as being really important to the work that they do. We're going to go through each of these one by one, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the problem is, what some solutions could be, and I'm going to invite other people to participate too. Even though this presentation is a sponsored session by Pantheon, and we, of course, have solutions to each of these workflows, I'm going to be honest and just tell you, like, we're not the only solution. There are lots of other options out there. So if anyone wants to share anything as we go along, please do share. All right, first things first. Agencies want an efficient setup of tools for new projects. They want to be able to get started on a project really quickly without having to do a lot of manual work. So Pantheon's solution for that is the developer dashboard. So in this case, whether the website that you're working on is, again, really, really small or really huge, you get the same developer dashboard that I just demoed a moment ago. You still get dev, test, live that are all in place, and your developers can have the same process to build any site, whether it's small or big, or complicated or really easy. So one of our past clients here has kind of made a quote here, and I'll have a few more quotes as we go along. He's Steve Blackburn of Texas X's here. Says, I needed a web environment where I didn't have to manage physical or virtual servers. So I can personally relate to this as well, because I worked for an agency before Pantheon, and in my situation, I was sort of the DevOps guy by default. I did not like DevOps. I did not have any experience really in DevOps, but I knew the most out of anyone on the dev team. Therefore, I was the person responsible for making sure everyone had their workflows in place and had the servers configured the right way and invited everyone to the right sites. when we, as a company, were looking at Pantheon as an option, it significantly reduced the work that I had on my plate. Basically, the process to spin up a new site for a client, we won a bid, we are about to start this project, just go into the interface and I say, create a new site, and then the workflow that my team used for the previous site is the same as what we're going to use for this site. It's just consistent, and it just works. Does anyone have any feedback or suggestions or anything they'd like to contribute?
I can validate that's the experience.
Cool, good.
Works really well.
Okay, well, let's keep on going. So the next one. Agencies really want to be able to share code between similar sites. So a common use case here is, let's say you are a university where you have lots and lots of really similar sites, whether it's for different departments or different student groups or different classes, who knows. The typical solution for this, what you might hear, is something like Multidev. Or I'm sorry, not Multidev, but multi-site, like Drupal multi-site. You can share a code base, so you have all the same modules and in some cases the same database, but you can break that out. And then you put all of the sites on that one Drupal installation. I've only had the pleasure of working with multi-sites a couple times in my Drupal career, but I've heard so many horror stories about it, about if you need to spin off a site, make it just a little bit different. It becomes really difficult because they're sharing the code base, and then if any one website goes down, it might take all of them down, or there's all sorts of different things. Can anyone relate to that, or anyone want to share a story about working with a multi-site?
Not without invoking PTSD.
Okay, fair enough. So for Pantheon, we also identified, we out of the box said no multi-site, we don't support it at all. But just recently, a year, 2 years ago or so, we released this new feature called custom upstreams. A custom upstream in this case lets you have the best of both worlds, where you can share a common code base, but you have the flexibility of having each site being independently run with its own containers and with the ability to make changes and customizations however you want.
So is this, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this, so is this kind of like maybe you'd have sort of a set install profile, you fire that off and then layer whatever you want on top of it?
It can be even a little more than that.
Okay.
So the way this starts is you have the core CMS and whatever common code that you want them to share, just like you might in a custom upstream. And you put this into a GitHub repo or a Bitbucket repo or something like that. And then when you go to create a site based on this upstream, it's just the same process that you would do in the Pantheon interface. You say create site. As an agency, any custom upstreams also appear in that list. So you could say, my fancy edu custom upstream, you click it, and it starts the same way that any other site started. So whatever pre-configured stuff you did, you could even do additional database changes and add this content or whatever you want to do after that process. And then each site has its own dedicated site. Each one is isolated from the other. So if you have changes you want to make to it, you can make those changes.
So if you have a security update that you need to do to that base code,
right?
I'm assuming it doesn't automatically flow up.
No, so you are maintaining the GitHub repository with the code in it. When an update comes out, you can apply the update to that upstream or to that code base. And then when you save that, when you deploy it, it then shows up in the dashboard, just like the upstream, the Pantheon Drupal core update that I saw earlier. It shows up in everyone's dashboard, and they can click update. And so you can distribute updates not just for core, but also any of your contrib modules that you're using, or themes, or any custom stuff that you're doing. You can distribute them out that way. Yep. Yep, and then it does give you also the flexibility to make any sort of custom changes you want. So they all start from the common place, and you can push out changes to the common place from the common starting point. But you still do have the flexibility to say, this one website, it started with our agency's sort of secret sauce and our theme and stuff, but it has a bunch of extra modules. It has it's going in a very different direction. Not a problem because of the way that it's kind of shipped out. You can have a site that's pretty different than the original. And then it also puts you in a position where if something bad happens on any one of those websites, it doesn't take down all the websites. So if one website, for whatever reason, maybe the client leaves, they fire you and they go off and do their own thing, you're able to, give them access to that site, kind of put them back on their own path, and it's not a big deal. Or if they add their own development team and they make a change, they take down their site, it doesn't do anything to the other sites. So you have this kind of assurance that nothing bad is going to happen, even if you have hundreds or even thousands of different websites running on this. Right, so a quote here from Daniel from ASU. Rather than helping people keep their sites running, we'll be able to concentrate on helping them make effective websites. So the real takeaway here from this quote is Daniel is able to focus on actually building the functionality into the website instead of having to manage the actual things running under the hood and making sure that all these websites on a multi-site are functioning the way they were supposed to. All right, let's look at the next workflow. Developing and deploying different branches in their own environments. So this is a pretty common workflow. If your agency is working with the sort of typical Git flow process, the thinking here is that you're working on a project and you have a developer and a front-end developer and who knows, a content creator or something like that. Each person should be able to spin up a branch and work independently without worrying about stepping on each other's toes. So you could have a branch, add your custom code, another developer or front-end developer, whatever, could be having their own branch working on the theme, and it doesn't matter so much that they might be using different methods and different requirements or anything like that. When the time comes for them to be done, they can push that, merge it back into the master branch, and it makes it so that you can actually launch with those changes without that complexity. So our solution here is Multidev. With Multidev, it gives you the ability to have as many development environments as you want. Basically, you can go into the Pantheon dashboard, you can go into the Multidev section, and you can actually say, create a new Multidev, and you could say, some common use cases for that is, let's give each developer their own sandbox, or let's create a Multidev environment for each new feature we're working on. It's also pretty common to spin up a multi-dev environment for security updates, for example. And the takeaway here, the most important piece to this is that when you're using multi-devs, when you're using branching, it means that you're able to keep dev, test, and live clear so that if something happens out of order, so for example, if a feature that one developer is working on finishes before the other one, or if a security update comes out in the middle of a development process, you're able to apply that update, create a new one, apply the update, apply it to dev, and not worry about, is this code that we're working on ready to go to live? Is it actually ready? Do we have to roll it back? No one likes to roll back code. No one likes to undo their work. That's no fun. So keeping dev, test, and live clear and available for updates means if John Doe, my coworker, finishes this feature before I finish my theme, he can apply that, test it, and deploy it without having to wait on me. So Patch.com is a client of Pantheon's, and this is a pretty cool quote because he mentions 50 million page views, 20 million uniques at that uptime with 35 million URLs and 40 terabytes of images, all with 4 developers. It really speaks to the sort of power and scalability that Pantheon lets developers have. It doesn't matter if you have lots and lots of developers. So let me switch back to the demo. So in my dashboard, so this is the site that I'm working on. Let me show you a multi-dev workflow. So in this example here, I have a security update. I have this upstream update available. The way that I recommend applying it is through a multi-dev environment. So let me just show you how that works. So over here at the top, next to dev, I have a section that says multi-dev. If I click on that, I'll see all of the multi-dev environments that I currently have. So I have one here called core updates. And it currently says, hey, this is one behind. So that means one commit has been deployed to the dev environment since the last time I've synced up. So it's one behind, not a big deal. It's 0 ahead, which means there's no commits in this environment that haven't been applied to dev yet. So let me go ahead and click on core updates, and I can see right? It says, hey, there's one commit that can be merged from master, and I can see exactly what that update was. So it was actually a previous version of Drupal that was updated. So that's cool, no problem. I'm going to start just by merging this update that's already been applied into this environment so that our multi-dev environment is actually going to match master. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this upstream update, the core update, onto this environment. So I can test it, make sure that I know what's going to happen when I actually merge it into the dev environment. So I'll start just by clicking merge. At this point, it's really kind of just running Git commands under the hood. So if you're familiar with Git, that's all this process is doing. It's looking at dev, which is master. It's looking at the core updates branch, and it's putting the master on top.
So how do you deal with merge conflicts in this?
Yeah, so there is this option here that says auto resolve conflicts. So in a case where it's a security update like this, you already probably know that you shouldn't be hacking core. So this would, if you did hack core, it would overwrite that. In a case where it's just like the merge, like I just did, if you had you were working on a feature and your colleague was working on a feature and you changed the same file, that's complicated to do from a UI. Sometimes there may not be a way to do it that way. It doesn't happen as often as I expected it to when I first started. But when it does happen, you kind of have to either basically like git pull, pull it locally, resolve the conflict, and push it back. That's really the easiest way. Yep, so that finished. So I have now this environment should be just like my dev environment. I can actually click this link here to open up my custom upstream environment just to make sure. So yeah, it says core updates, so that's the environment name, and then the name of my site, and then pantheonsite.io. So yeah, everything looks good, just like I'd expect it to. So now I'm going to go ahead and apply this. I'm going to check the box for auto-resolve updates, even though I don't expect it would make any difference one way or the other. I'm now going to apply the updates. So in this case, this is just a Drupal core update, but you can imagine a scenario where you have module updates, where every Wednesday some new updates are released. This is the process you might go through when you're applying those to put them into a multi-dev, a very safe space to work. You can then do whatever tests you need to do. You can even talk a little bit later about scripts you can set up to automate certain tests. So you could say, whenever an update comes out, apply it to a multi-dev, do a visual regression test to compare screenshots from this site versus the live site. If there are no discrepancies, if everything's exactly the same, let's go ahead and deploy that up to the live site because we know nothing broke. All right. All right, so it says here now that message went away because we applied that update. I have one unmerged commit, which is this update to 8.5. So this is the point at which I would go through and I'd run my QA. I would first check to make sure I'm on the core update site. In this case, I'm manually just kind of checking because I feel pretty safe about it, but you might have a whole process to make sure that the updates you're applying aren't actually breaking anything. I feel pretty good about this. I'm confident that this is going to work. So with that in mind, I'm ready to merge this in. I can either go back to the multi-dev overview where it says, hey, now you're one ahead. Click here to merge into master. Or I can go to the dev site and I can merge from there. I'm just going to do it from here and save a step. So it's asking me what multi-dev I want to merge from, core updates, and click merge code. But so while this is running, let me just demonstrate another thing. So I have another multi-dev set up here. This feature one, which is 3 behind, and like other stuff has been going on. You can imagine where there was a long-running feature where there's lots and lots of updates. Well, I just added a new developer to the team, and they have a local environment set up, and they spun up a branch, and they did some work, and then they pushed that branch into Pantheon. So using this section here on the side, I can see all of the Git branches that people have pushed up to Pantheon, and then with a click, I can create an environment based on this new branch that was just pushed here. So at any point, anyone could create a new branch with their code and their custom stuff, push it up, and then I can clone a database from whatever environment and get it up and running. And then they'll have a dedicated place to do configuration or to demo to the client or to get code review from their colleagues. All right, I can see from the workflow spinning here that this is running and there's stuff happening. It might still be merging as well. Nope, the merge finished. And I can see I have the update right there. So the next process of this, the next step would be we have these changes in dev. Now we need to deploy them to test and live. So you would just go to test, write a deployment message. In this case, it's Drupal 2 Drupal security updates. And I have options here to auto sync up the content from the live site down to the test site in this case, and I'm not too concerned about doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and run update.php, clear the cache when I do this, click the button. Okay, so this is going. While this is going, I'm going to go ahead, it just takes a minute, but I'm going to switch back to the presentation, so in the interest of time. Let's just keep on going, and then I'll come back to that in a minute. All right. So the next workflow is optimizing the infrastructure for performance. So the good news here is that we kind of already just do this. You don't have to think too much about tuning performance. The most significant performance boost you can give to your site is actually just enabling caching in the interface. Once that's done, you're talking about like millisecond or sub-second performance tuning. There are things you can do to get into that, and we certainly have recommendations on our website and entire classes dedicated to doing that. But a lot of the things are just already set up by default. You don't have to think about it. You just kind of build the site. Here's another quote. I'm going to keep on going in the interest of time. The next one, adding and removing team members from a project. So this is something, like I mentioned before, was kind of a pain for me. Coming from, I have my own server, I need to go in and add a new SSH key for the client or for the developer I'm working with, and if they're a contractor, I need to make sure that, kind of give them tight reins, and I need to maybe remove someone who just left or all those things. And I need to do that for every project we're working on, which ends up eating up a lot of time. So from Pantheon's interface, we have the team management console, which you can get from the agency dashboard. So let me switch back to that here. So this is what an agency dashboard looks like. You see all the sites that this agency is responsible for listed here, and we see all the different filters we can use. From here, we also have a section for people. So any people that you add into this list will have access to the sites that we saw on the previous page by default. But we also have options here when adding someone to actually change their role. So you could say someone is a developer. As a developer, you're able to work in a dev and multi-dev environment, but you're not actually able to deploy to your test or live site. So this is a case where you're okay with someone working on some new features, but maybe it needs to go through some sort of approval process. You want a senior developer or the project manager to sign off on these changes first. The team member has the ability to do that. They can also manage the site level team, which means for each site they can independently assign particular people. So for example, if you hire a contractor, they don't need access to all the sites, they just need access to like one site. You can go into that particular site, give them access, set their role, and then they're good to go. Then the administrator of the agency can do a lot more things with the agency itself, like change the name or add more people. All right, and then we have another quote here from In Residence. I went to my project manager and asked if she had scheduled dev time to start building the sandboxes for a project. She said she had already taken care of it herself. That was the project manager had already taken care of it herself. That was the moment of, whoa, this is real. That was my big moment. I can certainly relate to that. All right, the next workflow, actually launching the site and then all the subsequent iterations and deployments that you make. So that for that we have Dev Test Live, as well as, of course, the multi-dev that we talked about earlier. We do, depending on the tier, if you have like an enterprise level site, or we also have a guaranteed launch process where we have someone dedicated to helping you make sure that your website is going to go smoothly and is on the right tier and has performance testing and all the things set up in place. So that's not a problem. Here's one from another quote from White Fuse Media here. So I can actually relate to this, again, from the agency side, because before, when I was working for the agency, the process to take a website live, it would often take weeks of scheduling, because you'd have to make sure, talking to the client, making sure that the whatever solution they chose, or whatever solution that you're recommending, the server is set up properly, that it's tuned for Drupal, that it is going to work with all the functionality that the site actually is supposed to have. And then you actually have to log in and test it and make sure, and then you have to configure and make sure when the traffic hits it, it's not going to take the site. So there's all these steps you have to do, which means you're spending a lot of extra time making sure that the website's going to launch properly. When the agency I worked for switched to Pantheon, we went from it was a noticeably stark difference, because we could say, yeah, go check out the live URL. This is exactly what it's going to look like. We can performance test that live URL, and it's good to go. When you want to go live, just change the DNS settings, and it's going to go. There's no stress, there's no worry. Just do it and it's done. All right, so applying core updates. I actually already talked about this. There is that built-in one-click core updates process. And again, this is something that can be automated if you so choose. We'll just keep on moving. Connecting continuous integration processes. So this is a pretty cool thing. We're actually teaching a class at DrupalCon Nashville that will go through the process of working with a Drupal 8 site, built-in composer, hosted, or not hosted, but with a code base on GitHub, built with Circle CI, deployed to Pantheon. So that all sounds kind of complicated, but built into that process is the dedicated build step with a tool like continuous, like Circle CI or Travis or something like that. And then using tools like our command line interface with Terminus, we're able to connect from that environment over to Pantheon. We're able to run BHAT tests or other tests that are important to us on that environment, and then automate a lot of these things that are happening under the hood. All right, and then one of these last ones here is actually notifying external systems about deployment progress. And for this, we have a tool called Quicksilver Platform Hooks. With Quicksilver, you're able to basically inject your PHP code between different workflows in the Pantheon dashboard. So whenever you make a deployment, whenever you make a commit, whenever you clone the database in the Pantheon interface, you're able to inject this code in there to communicate to these third-party systems. So you could say, every time that I deploy to live, post a message in Slack, letting the client know. Every time that we clone the database, the live database, let's scrub the database of private information. Like if it's an e-commerce site, you want to get, if there's credit cards or anything like that, client information, you could do that. Every time that I make a commit with a particular hashtag number format, automatically post a message in Jira with a link to the Multidev, letting someone know that there was work done on that task. The options are kind of limitless. We have a huge repository of examples that you can dig into and actually take a look at and kind of see and use for your own. This is an example of another one. So for this particular, this is looking at New Relic. So it's again performance monitoring. Based on this, every line in this graph is a commit or a deployment that we've done. And so you can see basically where, I don't know exactly what the scenario is when whomever set this up, but it looks like they're maybe deploying a change and then maybe undoing the change and then doing, it's kind of a complicated thing, but basically you can, it communicates to New Relic so you can see exactly when a commit happens and then what the result is, what happens after this commit changes. So you could, why is my website running slow? You go into New Relic, you have a bar showing, hey, there's a commit 5 minutes ago. Who did this? What did they do? What did we change about that? And it gives you another place to look to when you're debugging that. Okay, reorient in a new project. This is also kind of a no-brainer because it just kind of works. It's once you've built a website on Pantheon and you're used to that workflow, it's the same process regardless of the size or complexity. So it's just keeps going. All right, so we have another quote here, and let me just recap here. These are the 10 that we just stepped through. Before we wrap it up, let me switch back to my example. So I have here our test. It's been deployed to test. If I go into live, I can see, oh, there's a commit ready to deploy from the live environment. But before I do that, remember I said test is where you're supposed to really do these the checking to make sure that when you deploy it, nothing's going to happen that's unexpected. So I actually set up some automated tests in the test environment. It's set up with Quicksilver so that every time I deploy to test, it automatically goes out to a third-party like load testing website. It hits the test environment with a bunch of traffic, and it will tell me how it responds to that traffic. So if I open up, it's a website called loader.io. I can see here on March 9th at 3:22 p.m. there's a test run. That was probably when the deploy completed. And I can see what happened. So it looks like everything is probably pretty normal. Like I've done this several times. This is a pretty normal result. And so I without having to do anything extra, this just happened for me. And you could do additional steps to say, every time that you deploy, run a test, and then put the results in Slack. So if you've been to DrupalCon, if you've seen our booth demo, that's one of the things we really like to showcase because it's something we're really proud of and it looks really impressive. But then also if we go into New Relic, so there's currently a single sign-on bug that we have to work through, but the way it's supposed to work is you click on this Go to New Relic button. It takes you into New Relic, and then you can actually see all the environments that you've set up. So based on this load test, I should be able to see performance data specifically for that environment, and then see how it works. Assuming everything passed, which I think it did, we can go into live and actually deploy the change to live. Click deploy, and then we're good to go. All right, and with that, that's it. Do we have any questions? Yes, sir.
Are there any plans to automate configuration management?
So the question was, are there any plans to automate configuration management? The good news is that you already can.
But you can't command line, right?
So you set up the code. So using Quicksilver, the automation hooks feature, you can basically set it up so that every time that you commit or deploy, it will automatically run drush and do a import of the configuration, and then you just deploy it like you normally would, and it automatically imports any configuration that you've exported.
Okay.
So you wouldn't have to use a command line every time. You just you set it up, and then it's good to go.
Okay, that's good.
Yes, sir.
Could you recap when you would want to use alternate workflows than what Pantheon has here by default?
Sure. So, I mean, the question was, can I recap any alternative workflows that might be different from what we talked about here? So one of them that's freshest on my mind is the kind of like the training that we're doing at DrupalCon, where our code base is hosted on GitHub. And the process involves, I'm working just with GitHub, basically. I'm committing, I'm pushing everything to GitHub. And then based on the changes that I make there, it auto-deploys that to Pantheon. And then your developers may never actually log into Pantheon itself. They don't have to deal with the code there at all. So that's a very unusual workflow from the norm. But the benefit is that if you have a process where you're working with a lot of developers and you want a standardized build step, Circle CI is definitely the way to, or a continuous integration process gives you that. And then it gives you a great tool like when you make a commit and you make a bunch of commits and then you make a pull request. So it could actually notify your senior developer and say, hey, there's this pull request through GitHub like you normally would. But then all of the tests will be right there with a check mark or an X to say, did the code standardization pass? Did the visual regression test pass? Did the BHAT test pass? And then it'll give you a link directly to the Multidev so they can go and actually look at it. So it gives them a great interface to say like, yes, this is good, or no, I need to push it back or something.
All right, so the short side of that is, in a way, you could have basically a GitHub-based workflow going on for, say, 50 developers, and once the pull request is made out to the seniors, they approve or not. But once they accept it, then Pantheon's hooks can approve it and then work it into the deployment side.
Right. Yep. So as they're making these commits, they actually multi-dev environments might be spun up so they can actually review their work or make configuration or whatever. But then when you do a pull request, and that's accepted, it actually detects the branches that were created, destroys those, merges it into the dev environment.
So clean up as well.
Yeah, yep. And it also can circle back the other direction. So when it's, like, let's say you make a commit, it spins up a multi-dev. If you go into that multi-dev and then export your configuration, that can get pushed back to GitHub and show up as a commit as well. Yeah, so I mean, it can really go any way you want. That's just one of the more popular alternatives that we've been seeing.
I admit, it's like in the past, I've heard that Pantheon is pretty fixed on what it was, and so I was just kind of wondering if that was really still the case or not.
All right, cool. Well, thank you all very much.